You know, when I posted my previous Mushoku Tensei video, I really didn't have any plans or intentions on having anything to write about in regards to Mushoku Tensei until Season 3 came out, but here we are. I want to preface this video by saying I'm a massive fan of MT, and it's currently my favorite work of fiction. I've read all the books, I've watched the anime more than once, you name it. While I don't think such a thing as an unbiased party exists anyways, I am far from that. Viewers of this video, both for and against the show, deserve to know my stance and biases up front before we get into the topic of today's video. As for the video's topic, I honestly don't know exactly how focused this video is going to be. I'm sitting here, currently writing the script, only 3 paragraphs in, and I have no idea how this video is going to turn out, or how long it'll be, or how focused it'll be, as I have a lot of things I want to cover and talk about. But a lot of it is probably just going to be discussion and exploration on the various valid and invalid arguments around Mushoku Tensei and how the communities interact with each other in healthy and unhealthy ways. To be honest, I don't expect much of anyone is going to like this video. I'm probably going to piss off the Mushoku Tensei fanbase, I'm probably going to piss off the Mushoku Tensei criticizers, and probably the beginning after the end, or Teeaboo fanbase, all at the same time. So, I guess the target audience for this video is, me. I've said this before on the channel, but this channel is where I can document and organize my thoughts and share them with the people I want to share them with, and if I happen to see growth at the same time, then so be it. I'm not exactly sure this is the best place to start, but let's begin with this. So, I spend a fair amount of time on Reddit. And yes, I know, rare is the time any positive story comes from a starting line like that. But while there is, a lot of Reddit that is a shithole, I spend most of my time on fan subreddits for series and video games I enjoy. It's fun to see when people post anti-ganks in the Elden Ring subreddit, or see somebody's nerf mech in the Armored Core subreddit, or just see the hundreds of Nazuna cosplays in the Call of the Night subreddit. It's just a fun way to see what other people in the community who like the same stuff as you are doing, and I enjoy it, and it's a little bit less political than Twitter as long as you stay out of the political subreddits. The Mushoku Tensei subreddit is no different. Most of the time in said subreddit is people gushing about the story, having discussions about the deeper aspects, fan art, whatever, you get the idea. But there is something else that comes up in the Mushoku Tensei subreddit frequently. A certain type of post that has made me realize something about the Mushoku Tensei community. In hindsight, it seems incredibly obvious, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be said out loud, and that is... the Mushoku Tensei community has a real persecution complex, huh? Now, don't get me wrong, the Mushoku Tensei community has a damn valid reason to have one, since, they get persecuted all the time. When people point fingers and yell at you, it's only natural to want to defend yourself by yelling and pointing fingers back. And in general, I am in alignment with Mushoku Tensei. I will argue for it against people who mistakenly call it trash or evil or what have you all day long. Because it's not trash, and it's not evil, and neither are the people who enjoy it. But something I've noticed is that some MT fans have gotten so used to defending their series that they look for criticisms in place where it doesn't exist, to a point where they argue in circles against fabricated people with fabricated arguments that don't exist, and create stupid argument loops. Now, don't get me wrong, people who attack the MT and its community do the exact same thing. The amount of times I've heard dumb shit like people who watch Mushoku Tensei are PDF files is worryingly large. And the problem is that when you persecute a community and audience unfairly and call them things that most people consider worse than being a murderer, it's only natural to expect those people to have a sour attitude when they take criticism. When some MT fans hear criticism, whether it's genuine or not, they're waiting for that one detail that proves it's not real criticism and is actually an attack on their person. They're not really listening to what you're saying as much as they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. And you do this too. This isn't a thing specific to the MT community, just slightly more obvious in the MT community because we are so used to having to defend the show we love against people who either don't get it, or are trying not to get it, or do get it but don't care. But everyone does this. You do this, I do this. Anybody who says they can take criticism purely and fairly and without an ounce of desire to defend themselves is deluding themselves. Now, you can, of course, take criticism without defending yourself, and that is a skill, but the desire is often still there. It's hard to take criticism, even when it's genuine, and the MT community gets a lot of criticism that isn't, so they developed this mindset that the show is perfect in every way, which it's not, and that people who say otherwise are out to attack them personally. And again, to be clear, I do not think this is a product of the series as much as it's a product of the larger anime community and how they treat fans of shows that they don't agree with. You can expand it further to anything you want involving something with two sides, really, but we're going to keep the focus on Mushoku Tensei for this video. It gets to a point in the MT community where you can very rarely and occasionally find people who have deluded themselves into thinking that Rudeus is a morally and ethically sound human being right from episode 1, and the idea that he could be a bad person is a silly notion. 99.9% of the Mushoku Tensei fans know this is a stupid stance. We see those people and know they are being dumb. The people who think Rudy is a moral and upstanding person from episode 1 do not represent the MT community as a whole. You can relax, we all know those people are stupid. And yet, while Rudy is a bad person at the start of the series, it's also true and hard to point out that in a large part, this is all he is. He has unhealthy ideas and beliefs regarding sex and women. He has a tendency to manipulate people to get what he wants. And at least at the start of the series, that's it. The thing Rudy is trying to distance himself from in his previous life is not any malicious action he's done, but the fact that he's squandered and wasted his life. He didn't do anything, not for himself or for the people who tried to reach out to him. He became a financial burden on his family. He became a shallow dick, upset at the idea that other people could enjoy their lives while he suffers. He didn't even show up to his parents' funeral. He was a waste of oxygen. He was a troubled and bad person who had no human interaction for 20 years. This was self-induced by an inability to deal with trauma. This is who Old Earth Rudeus was. But while he wasted his old life, it's also not exactly like he did anything wrong. Unhealthy? Sure. Dickish? Absolutely. But not wrong. That doesn't start until he gets a second chance in life. At this point, he is a man-child in the body of a child. He has all of the terrible habits that he built in his previous life stemming from the stagnation he built starting when he was 14, but without the isolation to filter him from other people. He doesn't know how to healthily interact with other people, and especially other people his age, and thinks of everything as a game. He relies on this and doesn't realize how boundaries work at first. On the outside, he looks like a normal, albeit hypersexual kid who is learning through trial and error how to behave. And it looks like that because that's exactly what's happening. And he makes mistakes. He does awful things, makes the people around him upset, and through that slowly learns lessons about how to treat people. This is who Rudy is. The oft-criticized scenes of the show rightfully make viewers uncomfortable, who then criticize the show with claims of it having fan service for children, or propagating pedophilia, or Rudy not being punished for his actions by the people around him. We'll get to all of these points eventually, individually, but before that, I want to talk about something called narrative dissonance. Now, hands up, who here has seen Sword Art Online? Y'all remember the Alfheim arc? Yeah, we're going to be talking about that today. Now, if you know, you know. And if you don't, which is perfectly understandable if you are a newer anime fan, considering this series aired 13 years ago, you're about to find out. So, in the second major arc of Sword Art Online, SAO, Asuna's brain is being kept hostage in a virtual reality video game by a rapist scientist who intends to brainwash her in virtual reality and then marry her in the real world. So Kirito needs to save the day by joining the game as a player and beat the admin to free his wife. Asuna is kept in this birdcage and visited by the sexually creepy admin Sugo, who makes no real attempts to hide his intentions or villainy from her, because he's just going to brainwash her anyways, so it doesn't matter. Important note, in this universe, in this in-game universe, player characters are fairies. They look like humans, but with pointed ears and magical insect wings. In one episode, she breaks out of her cage and attempts to find a console to log herself out of the game and wake up, and she almost succeeds until she gets caught by a pair of tentacle monsters and is precariously suspended, not unlike a certain porn genre. These two scientists work for and do research for Sugo to make headway in the brainwashing research they're conducting, and do work by experimenting on other SAO survivors that are also being held brain hostage by Sugo. Plot-wise, they find her, catch her, and bring her back to her cell. Except for this section in between catching her and returning her, when one of the slugs fills up her body and we get this set of shots. So I ask you, the audience, did this scene add anything? She's already sexually creeped out on by Sugo throughout the series, especially at the end, and these two lackeys are not Sugo the established villain, as much as they're just, random lackey scientists that work for him. They don't even know who Asuna is at first until they eventually recognize her as the girl that he keeps locked up. She's not intended prior to her capture to have any interaction with them, sexual or otherwise, and vice versa. This guy just feels her up because he wants to, I guess, and then it's never brought up again. Now, an even more important question. Why are these two guys slug tentacle monsters out of a porno? Allow me to clarify, these are not NPCs. They are not monsters programmed into the game. They are real people and real scientists who work for Sugo, who log into the game just like Sugo and all the other players in order to do work every day. So why aren't they fairies like everybody else? We aren't given any kind of reason to believe that they need to be slug tentacles in order to do their research, since presumably Sugo partakes in the work as well, and they are the only two people in the entire in-game universe to not have fairy avatars. It contributes nothing to the plot, and is just a weird random inconsistency. But it certainly contributes to this fan service scene. This scene does not need to be here. There's no point to adding it except to titillate the viewer. Nothing comes out of this scene, it's not explored thematically, and afterwards it's immediately forgot about because it's overshadowed by all the creepy shit Sugo does in the rest of the series that I'm not going to talk about. These two characters exist as slugs in order to give us a few titillating shots of Asuna. They exist for the purpose of sexualizing Asuna as slugs. Except why? Why are we being shown titillating shots of Asuna? Why is the camera intending for us to enjoy the sights it's presenting in a scene where I'm supposed to feel devastating loss on behalf of Asuna for her just barely unsuccessful escape attempt? Why is the show narratively telling me that she is a victim of sexual assault by Sugo, and then also trying to let me enjoy her being sexually assaulted? This is narrative dissonance, the separation between what the show is telling you and showing you. It gives the viewer conflicting messages and signals and comes across as hypocritical. This is bad writing. You can absolutely have sexual assaults happen on screen and not have it be titillating or fanservice-y. It's not hard. You do it by focusing on things that aren't going to turn the audience on. You focus on the perpetrator instead of the victim. You avoid shots that expose the victim's body in sexually suggestive poses. You show the emotion of the victim instead of the visuals of what's happening. Their dead eyes, or their hands clenched in anger or disgust. Their muscles straining and resisting. You don't linger on exposing shots and only show just enough to convey the facts of what is transpiring to the audience. You use music and sound effects that purposely create a sense of unease and uncomfortability. This is the difference between sexual content and sexualized content. This scene is bad, and everybody rightfully hates it. But it's bad because what we are being told narratively and thematically, and what we are being intended to experience and feel, are two different things that conflict with each other. A more modern example would be Tamaki's scenes in episode 10-ish of Fire Force, but I'm not going to elaborate because I've already done so with SAO as my example. I'm not going to do it twice. To be clear, SAO is not a series that is about sexuality. It plays no role in the themes or lessons or story past "don't be a rapist like Sugo." The entire series would be better if it didn't have the creepy SA subplot on the whole. And this isn't because you can't or shouldn't make a story around something like this. That's fucking stupid. It's because it has absolutely nothing to do with what SAO is about. And it's just flavoring to make us hate Sugo while having an excuse to get Asuna naked. If you want fan service in your show, go for it. I mean, I'm a red-blooded guy. I like titties. But put it in places where it doesn't cause narrative dissonance. Put it in shows where sexualization isn't something that runs contrary to what the audience is intended to feel. Keep it for when your characters are trying to be sexual with each other and it's not against the narrative. But this is bad. So let's return to Mushoku Tensei. On the contrary to SAO, MT is very much so about sexuality. It plays important roles in the characters, plot, and themes. A massive chunk of the series is spent exploring Rudy's unhealthy beliefs towards sex and women and correcting them. The scenes of his transgressions, as mentioned, rightfully make viewers uncomfortable. But let us ask the question now, is there narrative dissonance happening? The answer is no, because unlike this scene with Asuna, the scene of Rudy's transgressions are designed and shot to be uncomfortable. It is the creator's intention to make you uncomfortable watching these scenes. Let's very quickly run through a bunch of examples of sexual scenes and events in the first several episodes of the show, and show what I mean. In episode 1, Rudy wearing the maid's panties on the head is punctuated with a punch zoom and his creepy smile as he crawls out from under a table like a monster, and focus is given to Lilia being made uncomfortable by it. The panty shot of Roxy has her very unsexy and normal underwear on screen for all of 3 frames, just enough that we know what happened, and then the shot immediately switches to Rudy's fixation and him being distracted by it and messing up his incantation. This serves the dual purpose of characterizing Rudy and expediting the reveal to Roxy that he can cast without incantations, something he intended to hide. The sex scene of Paul and Zenith is 2 shots that show next to nothing of either of their bodies, and serves to establish that they have an active and healthy sexual relationship, and that they don't hide it and everyone can hear through the walls. Additionally, we see that Rudy is uncharacteristically not even remotely interested in said sex happening due to his single-minded obsession with his new fixation of magic. Their scene is not made to be uncomfortable, but it's also not sexualized and shows no more than necessary to establish what is happening. Similarly, in episode 2, when Roxy is masturbating outside the room listening to the sounds of their extracurriculars, Rudy isn't doing anything wrong as he sees what's happening and leaves immediately to give her privacy without acting on anything. So the scene isn't made to be uncomfortable either. But likewise, it's not sexualized, because this is just an event. Roxy is fully covered in clothing, and none of her body is shown. We see a shot of her face and her knees to help establish what is occurring, and that's it. Later in episode 2, when Rudy is staring directly at her crotch during lessons, we are shown the absolute minimum of what he sees through her closed legs in a single shot between uncomfortably close-up shots to Rudy's face while he loudly and heavily breathes and hyperventilates directly into the microphone. This is uncomfortable, and it's by design. That nobody in their right mind would design this and come out of it thinking, yeah, that's hot. There are zero provocative shots of Sylphie anywhere in episodes 3 and 4 where she is a character, even when Rudy forcibly strips her. The very first genuinely, actually sexualized scene in Mushoku Tensei happens in episode 4 during the flashback in which the maid Lilia seduces Paul and gets him to cheat on his wife. This is the first intentionally sexy scene in the show, and we are only shown what Paul sees. Lilia is in control of the camera. As the scene is about Paul being seduced, there is a narrative reason for the scene to be sexy, and even then, the show doesn't use it as an excuse to show more than what's necessary for the scene. In episode 6, Rudy gropes Eris in her sleep. She is fully clothed and not shot provocatively in any way. We are only shown the shot of Rudy touching her for a split second to inform the audience of what is happening before spending a much larger amount of time looking at Rudy with Eris not on screen, where we see his creepy smile and inner monologue with a deep adult voice. This scene is important because it adds meaning to the next episode when Rudy takes his first step forward by actively and consciously choosing not to grope Eris in her sleep given a second opportunity. To be clear, this is the absolute bare minimum that a person can do, is not grope somebody in their sleep. And it is a very small step forward. And that's exactly why it was important that we had it established that until this episode, the bare minimum wasn't something that Rudy was capable of. I only skimmed through a bunch of examples, but for more numerous and more detailed examples, check out the YouTuber Teeaboo and his reaction series to Mushoku Tensei, who focuses a lot of his conversation on this subject. Link in the description below.
How do we... let me do a thing here. This is a dumb thing, but let me do it really quick, alright? Alright, here's Konosuba Episode 1. Here's Konosuba Episode 1. Same concept in most cases, because it's a parody of Isekai, right? Guy dies to a truck, pushed some kids out of the way as his last act in this world. Immediately we meet Aqua, and one of the first things that we see of her is this. Boing? Understated, but that's there. Boing. Huh. Oh. Hey, wait. He's not looking at that. We are. Right? Interesting. This is fan service. This is for us. Walking in on a girl masturbating in a hallway and then walking out of the hallway is not fan service. It's an event.
The point is, if you pay attention to how scenes are shown in this show, you can tell that the show is extraordinarily careful in when and how it picks to showcase the sexual events that transpire in the series. This is the opposite of fan service. There is no fan service to be had here. These are events that are sexual in nature, but not sexualized unless they need to be. And they all serve narrative and character purposes. Calling the show fan-service or pedophilic in nature is just not accurate. It's contrary to how the show chooses to portray the events that are in it. Now, to be clear, us fans love these scenes, and these scenes make us uncomfortable. We love them because they make us uncomfortable. They are not mutually exclusive. That said, if you are someone who is made uncomfortable with sexual content in general, then yes, the sexual content of the series will put you off, and that is totally fair. If you are someone who is triggered by acts of SA being depicted regardless of whether it's handled well or not, either because of trauma or that you just aren't comfortable exploring such topics in general, then the show isn't for you. Despite how well-handled and careful this show is with its sexual content, I will never not recommend it to someone without first giving a content warning disclaimer. Not everyone is going to be comfortable watching this series, and that is fine and valid. You can't point to it as a reason that the show is bad, but you can absolutely point to it as a reason that you won't enjoy it, and if it's not something you're mentally in a position to explore, then neither I nor the sane portion of the fanbase will blame you for it, and that is a perfectly valid reason to not like the show. Of course, this isn't what the MT audience is used to being told. Often, and I can concur with this from experience, what we hear and see online is something along the lines of Mushoku Tensei is evil because of what it depicts, and you are evil for watching it and liking it. I don't feel like I should have to point this out, but here we are. Teeaboo says it best when he says,
portrayal of uncomfortable content in media is not necessarily advocacy. Actions taken by a protagonist in media are not necessarily viewed or to be viewed as heroic actions or inspiring actions. If you can't wrap your head around that, then I don't know what you're doing here, because it's part and parcel to the simplicity of the thing.
This accusation of watchers of the show being evil feels sometimes like a mantra said in order to dismiss anything you can say in defense. And it contributes back to that persecution complex the Mushoku Tensei community has, leading them to making equally stupid and unfair arguments back, and the finger pointing comes full circle. I saw a now deleted post recently on the subreddit that wasn't rightfully mocked nearly as much as it should have been until I stepped in, that was calling out a hypocrisy between two different TikTok posts, one of which criticizing the romantic relationship between spoiler and spoiler from Mushoku Tensei due to an age difference consisting of several hundred years, and the other praising an assumedly comparable relationship with a young and very old character from the beginning after the end, praising it as romantic. The post was shaming the hypocrisy around a perceived double standard. The comments were full of, yeah, true bros, and such hypocrisy, and all that. And what everyone in the post seemed to miss, until I pointed out myself in the comments, was that the two posts weren't from the same person. They were from two different people. There is no double standard because there are two entirely different and separate standards on display here from two entirely different and separate people. There is no basis to claim that the person who posted criticizing MT doesn't also hate T-Bait for the same reason, and there's no reason not to think the person posting about T-Bait isn't also a fan of Mushoku Tensei for the same reason. This was eventually what led to the post getting deleted by the moderators, but there were a few people who disagreed with me, saying that even though these two posts weren't by the same person, they were that there were people out there who did in fact imbibe this hypocrisy. And sure, I'm happy to accept and believe this claim. There's a lot of people out there after all. It wouldn't be unusual at all for someone to hypocritically hold both of these opinions. But my point is that, in that case, why use such a bad example when you presumably could find someone who has made two posts in the same vein and use that as your example? Because this just makes us look dumb. If you can't find a valid example, then clearly the people who hold that hypocrisy are probably fewer than you may think. The point is, and this applies to everyone, not just the MT community, especially since we just discussed the you are evil for watching MT argument, it's not a good idea to point fingers at the people themselves in a community unless you have valid and provable reasons to call out those specific persons, and don't try to spread one person's stupidity into a claim about a whole community. This is how you get annoying finger-pointing wars and breed persecution complexes. Here's another funny post on the subreddit that was now deleted and was rightfully mocked by everyone on the subreddit. Dude posted demanding to know why Rudy was such a hated character when other bad people characters are beloved, citing the two examples of Light Yagami and Sukuna? Look, I know this is a stupid comparison, everyone in the MT community knows that this is a stupid comparison. Even the Mushoku Tensei criticizers know that this is a stupid comparison. A direct comparison to Sukuna or Light is not a good comparison to Rudy, because those characters are very explicitly villains in their stories, and are static characters with earned downfalls instead of character arcs. Rudy is neither a villain nor a static character. He plays the role of protagonist like Light, but is not a villain, and grows over the course of the journey, becoming a better person along the way. This is to say that Light is a static protagonist. A static protagonist can, of course, be perfectly fine, both good or bad, but it's much simpler and easier to write bad people protagonists for a mainstream audience who are static, because most modern storytelling isn't truly in favor of redemption and growth of people going from bad to good. We're trained to watch character growth of good and misguided people to better people, and that often bad people in storytelling are deserving of punishment. More on this in a sec, I promise. I'll talk more about it. Here's a more interesting character comparison. The first of two I want to discuss today. Let's talk about the poster child for redemption arcs. Let's talk about Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. A character who starts as a villain in episode 1, grows as a person over the course of the series, undergoes a redemption arc, and comes out a good person. He even, similarly to Rudy, undergoes no direct external punishment for his transgressions, like burning down Kyoshi Island. Except those of you frothing at the mouth, commenting right now that Zuko is a bad comparison because he's not a PDF file or something, have hit the nail right on the head of why I think he makes for an interesting comparison. Identifying the biggest difference between Zuko and Rudy is easy, and that is that Zuko is not a shit person. When you talk about Zuko, you kind of also got to point out that Zuko started out as a good person and has always been a good person in his core, but was forced into an awful situation where he was set up to make bad decisions and mistakes to get the approval of a bad father figure. But at his core, he always was a good person. The reason that he got exiled was for the consequences of standing up for the soldiers of his nation and criticizing the use of inhumane tactics that waste lives. In a way, Zuko has less of a redemption arc and more of a prison break arc in which he frees himself from the emotional and familial shackles that were holding him down and enables himself to start acting in the open like the good person he's always been. Yet this does still include realizing his mistaken beliefs about his dad and atoning for the bad things that he's done, like burning down Kyoshi Island. So it's still a redemption arc, but it's an interesting conundrum. A lot of people were open and expecting Zuko's redemption very early in the series because he's portrayed as having good characteristics right from the get-go in episode 1, when the only company he keeps around is his goofy, fun uncle who wants nothing but for the best from him. We are being primed to see Zuko as a good person right from the beginning through the uncle.
Why don't you enjoy a cup of calming jasmine tea?
I don't need any calming tea!
He's actually a great example of something that MT talks about a lot, which is that good people can do bad things and bad people can do good things, and we are never defined by just a single action or thing that we did. In Mushoku Tensei, with a singular, carefully selected exception that I can't reveal for spoilers since the anime hasn't gotten there yet, every single character in Mushoku Tensei is shown to have both good and bad traits, and or have done both good and bad things in their past. But let's do a thought experiment. What if, for example, we rewrote Zuko's arc? What if he still ended up at the end of the series as the same Zuko, who proudly fought on the side of the Avatar for peace and dueled his sister for the crown? But at the beginning of the series, he was portrayed to have zero redeeming qualities and was an awful person through and through, down to his core, and had no uncle to lead him along the way and give him good advice. What if he was just, like, explosively racist or something?
I don't need any
Jews! What if his personality was the spitting image of Fire Lord Ozai? What if he was manipulative and a sexual creep? What if he was the spitting image of Rudy? Same endpoints, same overall plot and story beats, different starting points. Arguably, in our rewrites, new, terrible, irredeemable Zuko has grown far, far more of a person by the end of the series. But would it have been liked as much? Would people have latched on to Zuko and his story as strongly as they did if he wasn't nearly as likable as he was from the very beginning? As tempting as it is to say yes, this may be your positive bias towards Zuko and his arc, so please really take a minute to think about it. Would you enjoy Zuko's arc if it were like this? I think if you're being honest with yourself, the answer will reflect on your views towards Rudy, such as the existence that he bears. Although a protagonist undergoing change and improving themselves as a person is a core part of storytelling, people aren't quite used to characters who undergo growth being explicitly bad people as much as they are well-meaning or okay people with room for improvement. It's pretty undeniable that Rudy at the start of the series is well and truly not a good person, and that's not something that people are used to in modern culture. One thing I've heard from well-meaning but not entirely correct people of the MT fan base is the MT isn't a redemption story argument in defense of why Rudy is never punished. This isn't exactly accurate, but I get what they're trying to say. What they mean is that the story is never about Rudy righting the wrongs or making amends, as much as it's purely about improving and not making the same mistakes twice. But even if it's not a redemption story for his actions, it is a redemption story of who he is as a person, as he chooses to grow and be better than who he was, and changes for the better of his own accord. Not through punishment or for the righting of wrongs, but through getting a fresh start and trying hard not to make the same mistakes and do better this time. He missteps and takes a step back for every two forward, but it's in large part about that process. One of the biggest things pointed out about Rudius is that he never undergoes direct punishment for his specific transgressions. Nobody ever saws a leg off while stating, "This is because of what you did to Eris in episode 6, or anything direct like that. But this doesn't mean that he never faces consequences or punishment. As I hinted at earlier when discussing Zuko, the consequences he faces are narrative and internal and mostly self-imposed. Mushoku Tensei takes an almost Monogatari-esque approach in that you can't force and punish somebody to be better or be their savior. You can only do that yourself, though you can be helped. Nobody sits down with Rudy and tells him that he made a mistake with Eris in episode 8, when he believed he had consent and crossed a line and boundary while missing the absolutely massive and obvious signs and body language that Eris was not okay with what was happening. He realizes he made a mistake and almost ruined and destroyed his relationship with her on his own upon finally being forced to see her signals. He thinks, understands what he did wrong, why, realizes he needs to pay more attention to what people are feeling, and that we are more than what we speak out loud, vows to do better, and builds a genuine connection with her without touching her for 3 years. And not as a means to an end to get sex, but through love. And then, when they finally have sex 3 years later, she is advancing on him, and he thinks it's a bad idea. He says they should wait longer, but gives in to temptation and does it anyways. During, and in part because of their nocturnal extracurriculars, Eris decides to leave, and Rudy realizes for the first time that what he wanted wasn't sex, but the intimacy and love that comes with it, and develops a fear of abandonment, paranoia that nobody would like him for who he is, and erectile dysfunction.
ヘラヘラしてて何がおかしいんだよ。お前みたいに他人をけなしてバカにして自分の成果を自慢してそんで恨まれて嫉妬して嫌われてみんなが離れていってそれでも同じ態度でいられるなら俺だってそうしてる。嫌われたくねえんだよ。嫌われないために笑ってるんだよ。それの何が気に食わねえんだよ。なんでいなくなるんだよ。いてくれよ。嘘でもいいから笑ってくれよ。
And enters a suicidal depression resulting in one attempt on his own life that's only cured by building a loving and real relationship with somebody after another 3 years. This is him facing consequences. They are self-imposed. He put himself into the pit. His problems and beliefs about why what happened manifested in the form of Edie in the same way that Senjo Gahara's closing of her emotions related to her trauma and memories of her mother manifested as a ghost crab that took from her the burden both of her emotional and physical weight in Bakemonogatari. And just like Araragi, Rudy firmly believes that Sylphie and Roxy saved him from his emotional pits, and he is wrong and only ever saved himself. He himself put himself in the pit, and he himself chose to engage with Fitz and fall in love, not realizing that Fitz was Sylphie or even that Fitz wasn't a guy. He chose to pursue Fitz himself. Rudy is a person who lives and dies by his support network, but his accomplishments are still the results of his own work, something that will be reiterated to him by a character I can't name in Season 3. And similarly, after the events of the Begarit continent, while Roxy and Alina-Lise got him moving again, the one doing the moving is Rudy. Rudy knows all too well from his past life that you can have all the support in the world and still choose not to move forward after all. MT runs contrary to what most people are born and raised to believe by both their parents and by society and law, that punishment makes people better. If you break a law and go to prison, then you will learn your lesson through suffering and come out a better person. If you steal a cookie from the cookie jar and get hit or grounded, then you won't make the same mistake again. But does life really work that way? Many people who go to prison leave prison and break more laws, and the amount of people who revisit it is staggering. Can you really blame them when, as a punishment for breaking laws, you enforce their only social circle for years to be only other people who have broken laws and give them a new, stricter set of rules and laws to follow? When you got grounded as a kid, did you ever learn that what you did was wrong and bad? Or did you get better at hiding the thing that you were doing was wrong? Did you learn your lesson? Or did you learn that taking cookies from the cookie jar slower and over a longer period of time makes it less obvious? Or that if you arrange the cookies to take up more space, it won't look like anything is missing? If you stop to think about it, most people would say the latter. But it goes against what society has taught you your entire life. Bad people are irredeemable. Bad people don't deserve second chances. Only good people who make mistakes get those. That's what stories have conditioned people to think. Rudy starts by trying to manipulate people to sleep with him, and he learns that the best way to do this is to make a genuine connection and stop manipulating people and just be a good person. He also learns that what he wants isn't necessarily what he thinks he wants, i.e. the erectile dysfunction arc when he learns that what he wants isn't sex but love. A lot of people can't forgive that he initially just wanted sex and was willing to do bad things to try to get it. A large irony, given that the whole series is largely about giving people a chance to improve themselves. But yeah, I get how and why people think that. It's not the fault of the average person or anime fan, really. They're a victim of memes just as much as you or I or anyone else, using the old classic definition of memes here used in Metal Gear Rising, not the newer one. You and me are as much victims of our culture as Sylphie is a victim of her culture's memes when she thinks the idea of buying Rudy as a nude slave is hot and sexy in Volume 9 during Season 2.
ルディをお金で買う。うわ、本当にみんな裸になるんだ。おっきいな。あんな風になってるんだ。とにかく先を急ごう。
I could never really find myself faulting people for not liking Rudy as a character, even after you explain everything. I love Rudy. I think he's an excellent character. I also think he starts out as a terrible person. I have no problems with that because of what the series does with him and how it treats him in the narrative, and the careful depiction of all of his misdeeds. I also can't exactly fault people for not getting it, or getting it but not caring. They aren't the type of people I want to hang out with exactly, but I do get it. I think a lot more of that communal ire would be put to better use on the other character I want to compare and contrast with Rudius. If Zuko is the example of a beloved character with a redemption arc, this character is the one who is a little more mixed, but still widely defended, who is the protagonist and hero of their series, who is treated by the show as though they are the good guy, who never undergo an arc of improvements for their on-screen transgressions, who are treated like the show like they don't need to. We're talking about Meliodas from the Seven Deadly Sins. To be frank and quick about it, Meliodas is a character who, for the sake of comedy on the show, regularly sexually harasses and assaults his amnesiac reincarnated wife, who has no idea who he is or that they used to be married, and is brushed off in the show because they used to be in love? Or they're soulmates? Here's a fun fact. Cosmic unconscious love that may or may not exist does not equal consent. I digress, however, because I think M. Diddy here is a significantly less entertaining example to compare to Rudy than Zuko was. I had a couple other topics in mind, but I think they might be better explored when I am more free to talk about things that are currently spoilers, after Seasons 3 and 4 specifically. For now, this has been a detailed exploration of the gripes and arguments, good and bad, both for and against Mushoku Tensei, and my opinion on them. I hope it was interesting, and I hope that you learned something. If you think I missed a major perspective, please do share. I enjoy having my eyes opened too. Nobody has a true understanding of everything, of course, even me. Of course, I can't guarantee whether I will take it well, since, as mentioned before, taking criticism is hard, but I'll do my best to be open-minded. If I argue back with you, I either think you're stupid, or I think you're smart, and are trying to engage with you to solidify a point or seek specifics. I'll leave it to you to figure out which is which.